maybe you have some pain. Maybe you've been using your computer, doing a little bit too much, and you see an ad or you see something online and you say, oh, I'm going to fix this. I'll get a splint. It hurts when I move, so I'm going to splint my wrist, my whatever. Is that really a good idea? So here to explain whether splinting is a good idea or the pros and cons of splinting is our chief medical guru, Dr. Robert Markison. Maybe we can start with explaining the various kinds of splintings and why they would be useful.
Right, and I don't have an array of splints in front of me, but suffice to say that you splint minimally if you have to splint, and you have to understand why you're splitting. So first of all, the famously employed splints over the past, nearly a century now, have been carpal tunnel splints. Okay, and our understanding exponentially grew in mid to latter 20th century. Carpal tunnel syndrome, do you have it? Are the provocative tests positive for it? Do you classically present with numbness, tingling, thumb, index, middle, half of ring, sometimes more of the hand, with or without some later phase atrophy, weakening of the muscle, thenar, thumb muscle, which is an advanced case. And so the idea was nighttime splinting. Nocturnal splinting, keeping the wrist in about 15 degrees extension, never applying it tightly. How you do it, because in sleep, the unconscious hand could be underneath you, body pressure on it, and or flex into a fetal position. Neither of those are good. If you have a splint on, kinesthetically, you'll not want to be on a hard surface, so you'll get off it during sleep, reflexly. And so that can help, nighttime splinting, to help confirm the diagnosis of carpal tunnel syndrome and quiet down symptoms. The other splint commonly used is the thumb carpometacarpal joint splint to ease the pain and perhaps ease some of the loading through the vulnerable thumb joint called the carpometacarpal or basal or trapeziometacarpal or CMC joint, a lot of synonyms. Because if you put 1 pound of pressure here, it registers as 10 to 12 pounds here. So if you kind of retrain yourself with not a wrist/thumb splint, but a hand-based, hopefully adjustable thumb CMC splint, leaving freedom at the other joints, then that can ease your pain of carpometacarpal arthritis and sometimes useful in the daytime, hand-based CMC splint. Sometimes people are splinting for DeQuervains, this tendonitis, tenosynovitis at the wrist in the first of 6 extensor tunnels. And then they're going across the wrist and thumb. Problem with that is that the non-splinted members start to get overworked. And here we get into the question of balance imbalance, because this is a family of 5, or depending on congenitally how many digits you have, but it should be a happy concert and ensemble. And as soon as you take one out of action, the others are prone to overuse. So I was worried about the unsplinted members, whether it's the family in the hand or whether it's elbow, because the wrist is splinted, overused elbow, overused shoulder, adopt odd postures, because the key joint of the hand, the wrist, the key joint, is now tied up. So minimizing splinting is a good idea. I often have them start, if they must splint during the day for one reason or another, with a non-rigid splint. So that might be a neoprene wrap, not applied tightly, without a steel shank. And even the malleable steel shanks oftentimes are too constraining. But if they do this and maybe have some motion so they can make use of the key joint of the hand, which after all, the wrist is the key joint deciding the tension of the tendons, so much the better. Brief splinting during the day, probably okay, but not all day.
One of the issues that I've encountered before with other medical professionals is the idea of people fighting the splint. If they're using something a little more rigid, then you're basically fighting the splint. That's one thing, and creating problems elsewhere. The other thing is it's just leading to atrophy. So you're basically weakening your muscles if you oversplint or wear a splint for a long time. And I think anyone who's broken his or her wrist has thought, wow, I'm so weak now. Why is that? But the lack of normal use seems to have a really devastating effect on the muscle strength.
Well, it does. Obviously, it took eons of evolution to get us into our current 200,000 years of Homo sapienhood, which is really bipedal, upright, free-handed, active creatures. And it's important to maintain activity as much as you can, whether or not you're paraplegic or even, have more challenging problems. And so it's very important to make even natural use, neck, thorax, upper limbs, shoulder girdles, the whole deal. Because as soon as you splint a member, you're going to disturb a lot of biomechanics and maintenance of muscle and all the musculoskeletal and neuromuscular systems. You have to understand that this is complex tapestry from opposite hemisphere crossing over lower brain through the spinal cord, talking to the hand, meaning motor muscle, listening to the hand, meaning sensory. And so you disturb that tapestry too much and you block it, whether you're Chinese kind of chi energy bound or whatever you want to say, but you block those pathways and you're kind of setting yourself up for trouble. Again, nighttime splinting, carpal tunnel syndrome, probably okay, but if it's too serious, you get some specialty level treatment. Daytime thumb, rarely non-rigid wrap, I would call it, as opposed to a splint on the wrist, probably okay. I don't like the tennis elbow straps because they're choking inflow, outflow circulation. And so be careful, keep that to a minimum and seek some reasonably qualified attention, specialty attention early.
Yes, I think doing this under a doctor's supervision, careful supervision, quality care is really important. And I mean, it's really scary. When I wrote my first book, splinting, as I recall, was one of the risk factors for reflex sympathetic dystrophy. So, I mean, it's just not something you really want to fool with. And I love what you said about us being a tapestry of movement, not wanting to disturb the threads down here and pull something further proximal. I think that's wise. So Dr. Markison will be back talking about other fascinating topics soon.